Hello and welcome back to the 10-Step Mix. I'm Al from musicguypodcast.com and we're working on my song Waiting on the Right Time, which is available on Spotify. We've imported our template, we've got our rough balance, we've processed our mix bus, we've got the lead vocal sounding good. Now we're ready to start working on the drums. So naturally, we will start with the kick drum. And I've got some of these plugins here that aren't part of my template. They were part of the tracking session, so I'm going to just get rid of these real quick. And let's check out what we've got going on the kick drum. So we're going to do a similar thing that we did with the lead vocal, where we're going to sort of go fishing for some resonant frequencies that we may want to get rid of. So we can see the first plugin we have here is the stock Pro Tools EQ, and I've already removed some frequencies on the previous session, so I'm just going to zero these out. And these are more of a tight Q cut as opposed to the broader, gentler cuts we were doing on the lead vocal. I like to just really get these frequencies all the way out of the drum if we can avoid it. So what we're looking for is just some resonant frequencies that don't sound like they're part of the core sound of the drum. So there will be some resonant frequencies that sort of go woo, that you might think, oh, I should cut that. But if it's sort of part of that fundamental core sound of the drum, you probably want to leave those in there. So I'll sort of show you what I mean here. Let's jump to a section of the song with lots of kick drum where our drummer Rich Da Silva, the great and powerful Rich Da Silva, we'll see where he's playing nice and loud here. In the third chorus, we'll just loop that. Have a listen here. I'll turn this up a bit. So we'll start fishing for frequencies here. So this kind of stuff down here, 75, 60. I mean, it hums, but that's the core sound of the drum. That's what really, that's a good sound. We want to keep that in there, but somewhere up around maybe 150, we might start to find some weird sounding stuff. Let's see. $130. So that's kind of like a tennis ball-y kind of sound. So I'm going to cut that out. I'm just going to wipe it right out of there. And we'll look for the next one. So it's sort of the most egregious area of this sound. So we'll wipe that one out as well. And so again, these are frequencies and sounds that you would not associate with a good sounding kick drum. So that's why we're getting rid of them. And we'll pull that out as well. Okay, so now let's see if we have done anything productive here. It's just tightening up the sound of the drum a little bit. Takes a little bit of that boxiness out. And let's move on. We've got a gate next. And this is just sort of bringing the level down in between hits so that we have less bleed from the other drums. So we've got it at -20, fastest attack possible so that we don't miss any of the actual drum hit. None of that gets chopped off. And the release and the ratio I just leave as default, and I'll mess around with the hold a little bit just to get it so the timing is good, and I'll show you what I mean there. And then the threshold, we're just making sure that the kick drum opens the gate, triggers the gate, and that other drums do not. So we want to just adjust the threshold until that is the case. So let's have a look here. So I put this threshold too low. See, the snare is starting to trigger it a little bit. And if I put it way too low, it just never closes because there's too much sound coming into it. So bring this threshold up. There we go. And then I kind of want the hold, adjust that so that the gate closes by the time the the snare would hit. So we can hear the snare still creeping in there sometimes, so we'll bring this back. There we go, somewhere around there. All right, and we'll bring in our Vibe EQ here. This is the Scheps 73. It's I think just a kick preset I found on here. So it's adding some 3K for some of that slappiness, some of that attack, and it's adding some 35. But the way this plugin works is it also high pass. It adds a bunch of 35 and then high passes at 50, which sort of creates this bump, this resonant bump that I guess used to and still exists, I guess, in these old Neve units. So it's a bit of a old engineering trick there. And so this is going to add some low thump and a little bit of slappiness to the kick. And let's see how it sounds. So a little bit extra presence, a little bit extra thump. Subtle, not crazy, nothing crazy there. And then we've got another EQ here that's just sort of gently cutting out some of the mid-range junkiness in the kick. Let's hear how that sounds. So again, around 250. Gets rid of a little bit of that tubbiness and just sort of a nice tight sort of kick drum sound there. And the last plugin we have is another Lo-Fi plugin, just adding some little bit of distortion, just add some more energy and intensity to the kick drum. Let's hear it. Adds a little bit of volume too, which is never a bad thing. So there's our kick, and our kick out is going to be the same. So we will just Alt, click, and drag, copy these things over. And now we can mix between these two kick in and kick out mics. So we want a more old school sound. We can bring down the in mic and bring more of the out mic. Give a little bit more of that thumpiness. And the more in mic we use, the more of that clickiness and tightness we get. So sounds pretty good. Maybe we can bring these both down a little bit. All right. And let's jump over to the snare. Let's check it out. So we don't have one of these EQs. I like all the frequencies in a snare drum, so we're just going to leave them alone. You could high pass it a little bit, which I think we will do in this EQ down here. We'll start with a gate. Bit of a more gentle gate, since a snare is a bit more of a dynamic instrument. You want to get those ghost notes in there. Looks like it's set pretty well. Timing looks good. It's not getting triggered by any other drums. So we'll leave that alone. Next is our EQ. We have two EQs actually. So let's start with this one. And I sort of have these both in here. I've got the SSL channel, I've got the Neve. We can decide which one we like better. There's a little bit more thickness in the SSL. Yeah, I like that. Let's go with the SSL for now. We'll leave this out and we can come back to it if we want. And lastly, we have a little bit of lo-fi. Same deal here. Just adding more energy to the drum. And then we're literally just going to Alt, click, and drag, copy these right over to the snare bottom mic. And if we want a bit more paperiness, hear the wires a bit more, we can up the volume of the snare bottom. I usually keep them about 6 to 10 dB apart, so we'll hear that with the kick. So we can see that we are clipping a little bit. I'm not too worried about clipping with drums. They're a very transient, heavy instrument, so you're not going to hear or notice a little bit of distortion here and there if it is happening. But I've even done some null tests on Pro Tools where I've compared a clipping drum to a not clipping drum according to these clip lights, and it's come out to be a null, to be the same. So I think we do have a little bit of leeway here as well. So for drums, there's some lights coming on. I don't mind that all that much. Okay, let's jump to, I guess we can bring in our snare reverb here at this point. So we'll make active our snare send here. It's follow May pan, and it's post fader, and we'll bring in our snare reverb, which is actually just a sample of a reverb. That way you're not getting a bunch of reverby sound of the rest of the drum kit. You're just getting only a snare reverb sound. So it can be a little bit intense for a song like this, but I'll show it to you anyways. And I also have a compressor here ready to go if you want to really go for that giant splat kind of big arena rock sound. So let's hear how that sounds without the compressor. And so we can back that down a little bit. Just adding a little bit of size to the snare drum there. Next, we've got our toms. And these, I'm doing a little bit of sampling on the toms. Drummers don't hate me. I know drummers don't love the sampling, and I understand. I'll show you what I'm doing. It's not as bad as you think. So I'm using trigger here. I'm using one of the quick tom samples and the reverb from that. Turn this up a bit so you can hear it. And I've got them mixed here inside. And I'm only using 50% of the tom sample and 50% of the direct tom. So I'm not completely replacing the sound, just 50%. And then the EQ I'm using is the PuigTech. We're adding a bit of 100 and a bit of 5K for that stick sort of sound. And same thing with the floor tom. I'm using the quick tom from the same pack. Turn that up for you. So just going to add a little bit of depth and size to these toms. So let's find a tom section and have a listen. So for a song like this, where it's got a bit more of a chill kind of vibe to it, maybe a little bit of like a Fleetwood Mac drum sound is more what I'm after here. I'm not going to use quite as much of the samples, so let's bring this down to maybe 20%. So it's just going to be adding a little bit of a reverb sort of sound to the drums, and we'll see how that goes. Let's listen to that. Yeah, sounds much better, much more natural. So we have this drum aux over here. This is called drum comp, and this is what you would call a parallel compressor. So the kick, snare, and toms are all going to be sent to this compressor in addition to being sent to the mix bus. So that's why they call it parallel, because there's the main tracks of drums that are going to the mix bus, and then alongside is a copy of them going to a compressor, which also ends up at the mix bus at the end. So you get the sum of both at the end. So it's going to add some volume and some compression without, really squashing everything too hard. So we'll turn these sends on, and also for our snare reverb as well. And here's our drum comp. It's just another API compressor. It's probably going to be working pretty hard here. Yeah, pretty hard compression there. But because it's in parallel, we can go a bit harder with it and get away with it. And then we've got an EQ just adding some top end and a little bit of thickness down here. So it's adding quite a bit of volume, but also brightness and tone and thickness and energy and everything, all the good things. And again, I'm not worried about clip lights on drums. A little bit extra distortion's always nice, so I'm good with that. So let's check out the overheads and see how they're sounding. So we've got an EQ that's going to just pull out most of the low-end stuff. I don't want any phase or weirdness against the kick and the snare. They can stand alone from their own mics. And so these are acting mostly as a cymbal mic. And again, I've got just some points here subtracting some of those harsh sort of junky frequencies that we don't want. So let's see what those are like. So we can hear on that crash cymbal, just brutal. So we're just going to pull that all the way out and let's check this one out. So nobody wants that. Go away. So without it, you can hear those kind of whistles over top. And there you go. And we're also rolling off a little bit of top end. And I think I'm going to move this up to 16K actually. And this is just leaving a little bit of room for the shaker and for the vocals and stuff like that. And just so that the cymbals don't completely take over the mix. And then in addition to that EQ, we've got another EQ, which is going to be adding some vibe, a little bit of top end that we just pulled out, but we're adding some back in here. And subtracting a little bit of 3K for some of that harshness. And high passing again. This is just a preset that I pulled up. So here it is. Adding a little bit of shine, a little bit of sparkle. And we got a compressor here just to tap on the snare a little bit to rein it in. So that we can turn the overheads up a little bit and not have the snare get crazy out of control. And then we've got an L1 here just for level. Making it louder. We don't really want to do any attenuation, so I'll bring this threshold up. There we go. All right, and then we can mix this in with the rest of the kit. So I'll solo up the whole kit by using my VCA here. And we're not ready for these yet, so I'll mute those. Oh, not these yet either. Cool, sounds pretty good. All right, let's look at the hi-hat. Nothing crazy going on with the hi-hat here. Let's have a listen. Just a little bit of EQ. Just cutting out all the lows and adding a little bit of brightness at the top. I think for this song we want a little bit more of a darker sound, so I'm going to take that top end off. And we've got our room mics. For room mics, I've got a reverb plugin to make the room appear to be a little bit bigger. Without it, the room sounds pretty small because we're in a pretty small room. We add a little bit of verb, adds more space. And then we've got another EQ, which honestly I would just pull right over from this overheads EQ. Except maybe we want a little bit less aggressive. Can adjust this low roll off to get more toms and snare body in there if we want to. All right. And lastly, let's look at our percussion. We've got shaker. Just rolling off a ton of low end and a tiny, tiny little bit of high end again, just for headroom and to let the vocal sit on top. And then we've got a limiter here just to make it louder. We don't want to attenuate. So we'll just bring this up. Cool. So now the shaker's nice and loud. And we can also send it to our instrument reverb. So I'll activate that send. And we get a little bit of reverb. I gotta activate this as well. There we go. Now we got some reverb. Sounds good. All right, our claps we can treat similarly. We don't need quite as big of a high pass filter. We'll probably bring this down. Let's say 500. And we got our limiter. just to make it louder. And we'll add some reverb as well. We'll copy that send over. There we go. Cool. So here's all of our drums together. And here it is in the track. I'm done waiting on the right time. Waiting on the right time. Sounds pretty cool. All right, we'll be back for the next video to look at the bass. See you there.